Now, once we understand the short run versus long run equilibrium in an AD and AS model, now we can start talking about the shift of the curves. Again, we still follow the same way we used to discuss supply and demand in the intro class. So we derive the demand curve and supply curve in the first place, and then put them together and talk about the equilibrium condition. And after that, we start shifting the curves. Okay, so here for the aggregate level supply and demand, we follow the same way to talk about the model. Okay. Now here, first of all, let's check out the shift of the aggregate demand curve. Okay, and especially what are the factors that could potentially shift the AD curve. Now, to be able to do that, let's take a look at the components of aggregate demand. Okay, and this again goes back to chapter 3, I believe. I'm sorry, chapter 2, when we talk about the components of GDP, right? And we said there are 4 components: consumption, investment, government purchases, and net exports. So let's check out these 4 one by one. Okay. The first one is what could potentially influence consumption, okay, or how much we consume. Back in chapter 3, when we talk about consumption function, we said that consumption depends upon 2 things primarily: okay? Interest rate and disposable income. Okay. Now, if the interest rate is higher, then it's more expensive to finance your consumption, especially the big items. If you want to purchase a car, a house, okay, or some appliances, if you take the loan with a higher interest rate, now it's more expensive to take the loan, right? Or you pay more on a monthly basis. So consumption would decrease, and the AD curve would shift to the left. Again, it's the same thing we did before. So less means leftward shift, more means rightward shift. Okay. Now this is the interest rate. The second important factor is the disposable income. And disposable income depends upon 2 things. Number 1, the gross income. Number 2, the taxes, right? So the gross income or the wealth, okay, is the very important factor. If the economy is wealthier, especially the households, okay, are wealthier, then consumption would rise. So the AD curve would shift to the right, okay, because it means more aggregate demand. All right. Vice versa, with less wealth, then consumption would fall and AD would shift to the left. Okay. Taxes. Now, if the taxes increases, then the disposable income goes down, right? So consumers would purchase less. Consumption falls, AD shifts to the left. Okay. Another factor we would also consider is the confidence, because in the previous chapters we already mentioned what's called the rational expectation, right? So we said that the people's expectation is a very important factor. Okay, so here, if households believe that the future economic situation is going to be better, okay? For example, they're going to make more money, okay? Or their jobs are going to be more secure, then they would spend more at this moment, okay? Of course, there are many different ways to finance their current consumption with their future income, right? Credit card would be a pretty classical example. So the consumption would go up and AD shifts to the right. Okay. Now, that's the first component, consumption. The second component, investment, which depends upon the interest rate, okay, primarily. So a higher interest rate, the investment would decrease and AD shifts to the left, okay. Taxes also important for investors because it will change their profitability or the profit margin, okay, with the higher taxes. So here, if you go back to the first component, when we talk about consumption, when we see taxes, it's more about the income tax. Okay, here it's more about the capital and corporate tax. Okay, so when these taxes go up, investment will go down. Okay, and the AD shifts to the left. And confidence still matters. Okay, expectations. If the investors are more optimistic about the future economy, they are going to invest more right now, okay, to meet the future increase in market demand. So the aggregate demand would shift to the right. Okay. Now the third component would be government purchases or government spending or government expenditure. Okay, these three terms are often interchangeable. Now, government expenditure is determined on the Capitol Hill, okay, or by the U.S. Congress. So, when they decide to spend more, AD would shift to the right, okay, because the government is going to purchase more on the market. Okay. And the very last one is net exports. That means our exports minus imports. Okay. Now, the net exports, especially exports itself, depends upon two things. Okay, the first one is the health of global economy. Okay, if the global economy is very strong, it will have a larger demand for the U.S.-made goods and services. Okay, so we can export more. All right. If the global economy is pretty weak, like what is happening right now, then they will have a less demand for our exports. Okay. And another important factor is the exchange rate of the U.S. dollar, okay, against other currencies. Now, if the U.S. dollar is pretty strong, that means the U.S.-made goods and services are going to be more expensive on global market, so we're going to have less export. Okay, so the AD would shift to the left. Okay, and vice versa, if the U.S. dollar depreciates, in other words, it loses its value, then the U.S.-made goods and services would be cheaper on the global market, so we can export more. Okay, so AD would shift to the right. So these are the factors that would change the aggregate demand. Okay. Now let's take a look at the factors that could change the aggregate supply curve, especially the short-run aggregate supply curve. Okay, compared to the demand analysis, the supply side would be much more straightforward, okay, or simpler. Now, here we're looking at the factors that could change the productive potential of this economy. For example, in some, very extreme situations like civil wars or a war with a neighboring country, natural disasters like earthquake, flooding, right, wildfire. These will definitely shift the short-run aggregate supply curve to the left because they reduce our productive potential. Okay, they oftentimes destroyed, the capital, right, factories, machinery, equipments, land, and even lead to some decrease in labor force. Okay, and another common factor we will discuss later is the prices of the inputs, because the producers need to buy these inputs to be able to produce, right? So if the input price goes down, that means the cost would be lower. Okay? So it's cheaper to make goods and services then the short-run aggregate supply curve shifts to the right. Okay? And vice versa, if the inputs becomes more expensive, then the SRAS would shift to the left. Okay? Now, remember when we derive the short-run aggregate supply curve, we use a theory called the sticky price theory, right? Over there, we said that the input price could be stickier in the short run. So here, what we're looking at is really some particular inputs. For example, oil. Okay, the crude oil is what we're gonna discuss later. We're gonna discuss it a lot. Okay, because different from the wage and other raw materials, you would find the crude oil price fluctuates a lot. Okay, so even in the short run, that would heavily influence the producer's decision. Okay, now here we already finished our discussion about the primary factors that could shift aggregate demand or aggregate supply curves. Okay. Now on the next video, we're going to work on the graph to show you 4 different scenarios, okay, about the shift of these 2 curves. And that will lead to a very important conclusion or 2 conclusions for us to make the judgment about the macro economy.